Hi, my name is Kevin and I collect old irons. This video will be pretty esoteric, even by my standards. Let's talk about the difference between diversity and variability. Diversity is the grand collection of members within a large group. For example, could be all the frogs and birds and fish in a lake ecosystem, or all the frog species in North America. In the last video, we talked about the diversity of fluting irons, hand, machine, and combination fluters. Variability, on the other hand, is the more subtle differences individually between members of a species. We are all different individually because of the variability within Homo sapiens. Here, this is applied to the versions within a particular narrowly defined manufactured design. There is diversity in practically everything, but perhaps particularly something like irons that had long production histories with minor changes made over the course of time. I have to tell you that with my limited space, I cannot collect variants of all these various irons, but I do have a good collection of fluters, and in that collection there's some pretty good examples of variability. Let us start, as an example, with the Mooney Little Giant, patented 1873. The general type is rather rare, and yet I have three examples and they differ. We'll start with a little bit of definition of terms. For this one I have 6 flutes with 5 grooves. That differs from these two, which have 8 flutes with 7 grooves, and there is a 6 groove version out there that I don't have. But also there are differences in the handles. This is the very common handle, but this one, and I think this is made like this in the factory, has this spiral handle, and there is differences in the markings, between these two, and this one came with this base, and then the other two came with the more common base, which is a wooden base. So here we have variability in the number of grooves in the back, in the handles, in the markings, and in the fluter bases. With that, let's take a look at the most common individual fluting iron design, that being the Geneva hand fluter. This design was used for something like 50 years. I'm thinking late 1860s to early 1920s. And during that time, there's very little differences in the general structure of the iron, but there's lots of subtle variations. I have 4 of these, and they are different. This one has the Geneva in raised lettering without a boundary around it, and has a dot pattern, very visible raised dots on the top of the fluter plate. We have the same raised letters here, but here we have a much different, much less visible lettering with much smaller dots. On this one, we have the distinctive raised dot pattern again, but the Geneva is here depressed with a rectangular boundary between them. And then here I again have the raised pattern, but with the Geneva hand fluter blocked off with a rectangular structure. So the handles are different, and the bases are different too. Going from left to right, this one has patent August 21st, 1866, heat this. This one has heat this, patent applied for 1871. This one has heat this, patented 1866, and this one here just says heat this. There also is, for this particular one, a rather unusual brass bottom plate, whereas the rest of these have zinc plates. So there are quite a lot of variation here, and I know from Mike Pagano, who has a more substantial collection than I have, that there are at least 12 different variations, and I'm sure there's more out there. The second most common of the fluter irons is the best hand fluter, and for this there appear to be two subtly different styles. This one has a more narrow handle with cross-hatching, if there is cross-hatching, not so well pronounced on a high base, whereas this one here has a more developed handle with better cross-hatching on a more squat base. For both of these, there are 14 flutes with 13 grooves, although I have another one here of the more ruggedly built handle type, and this one has 12 flutes and 11 grooves, so there is some variation on that count. Now, both of these have at the bottom C.W. Whitfield, Syracuse, New York, patent applied for. There are also, I think, some later versions that have H. Foot, Syracuse, New York, also patent applied for, and as far as I can tell, the patent doesn't exist. We have not yet been able to find it. But there's also what I am going to call variability within each of these two styles, and this is variability in fluters that are not called the best. One thing that's interesting about these other hand fluters is that all of them are a little bit different in terms of the number of flutes and grooves. These have 15 flutes, 14 grooves. A reminder that the ones properly called best have 14 flutes and 13 grooves. And all of these have no markings on the bottom, and they have different markings on the top. This one's called, with a horseshoe, JBK. This one's called the gem. This one's called the star. This is called the lady's friend. These are all of the general style that I call the high handled. And here we have another JBK and another star in the style that I might call the squat handled. So what's going on here? The gem, the star, you might think those are separate companies, but I think the general structure of these is all exactly the same as best. So I think that whatever company, be it Whitfield or Foot, that was producing the best was producing these for, you know, various other companies that wanted to market these under their own name. So quite a considerable amount of variability here, and again, I have not tried to systematically collect every kind and version here. There are many more than what I have here. So in the best group of hand fluters, there is variabilities in two basic styles with different handles, different flutes and grooves, different markings on the top plate and on the bottom of the base plate. And there's variability in probably all the various manufacturers of machine fluters. These are Manville fluters, and these are early in the late 1860s, when the fluter designs were like the English style of having the rollers to one side and the handle to the other. These are different. This one has a larger diameter at the base, a little bit higher height. This one's smaller. And there are some other minor differences between these as well. But you might notice that both of these have the front of the fluters facing you. Here the rollers are on the left, here the rollers are on the right. And it may well be that I have noticed in the few examples I've seen of these, they're each with the rollers on the right, and a couple examples I've seen of this, they have the rollers on the left. It may be that these are for right-handed. Again, I'd use my left hand to push this down, and then use my right hand for feeding the fabric through here, and these would be left-handed for those that have the left-handed persuasion. By the way, these are much rarer than those, which is what you'd expect if it's used by left-handers. For the Dudley fluter, patented 1876, I have two different versions, differing in a variety of subtle ways. And there, by the way, is a third version out there that I don't have. It's quite rare, and it is the type that is depicted on the patent. For these, again, more robust size on the left, a little more petite size on the right. And I need to mention too, we're talking primarily about the variation in the hardware. There's considerable variation in the painting of these as well. So I have two representatives here that are of large groups. This is the Imperial Knox. Of course, Knox is quite a group of different irons, sometimes being made by different companies. For the Imperial Knox, some of them have a spring on the front, others do not. And this is a representative from the American Machine Company of Philadelphia. Again, many different designs, but for each of these, there is an abundance of variation. This particular one says patent applied for. Others would have patent dates and various presentations. This one also has different kinds of markings, sometimes raised markings, sometimes not. All that is just the hard copy variation. Amongst these, there is endless variation in terms of the painting and the stencil work. Of course, these are done individually, so each iron is unique. This is also, for some of these designs, they have different decals as well. So endless variation here. I see personally no point in trying to collect all those different designs and some, but some people do that. And let's take a look at a couple of combination fluters here. These are can be used as flat irons, but with a little latch here, if I unhook that, you can use them as fluting irons as well. I have interpreted, and I still interpret, these two irons as being done by different companies. There's enough distinctions between them to suggest that to me, and yet both companies are using the same Myron Knopp 1870 patent. August 2nd, they both have the dates here. So two companies using the same patent. Well, when I was at a PICA meeting a couple of years ago, they have a buy swap sale opportunity, and I found a couple of more which I bought as duplicates. Okay, I just saw these, they were cheap, and said, well, you know, I'm going to buy these because they're cheap. I can always use some duplicates. I like to occasionally give something nice to some novice collector that might come by or come in communication with me. When I took them home, huzzah! These two are different. Okay, they have different sizes. Then they also have the latch in a subtly different place, and they have the same markings but done in a different way. And these two are different as well, different in size and some other differences likewise. So here we have, whether there's one company or two companies, if there are two companies, there's variation within both companies. And that I think we can apply across the board, not just in terms of fluting irons, but irons and antiques in general. So variation is an interesting topic and something that we should be aware of, but frankly, I think very few of us have the money or the time or the room to be pursuing all these variants. But maybe, and I think many collectors do, for something of their particular interest, they notice the variants and they make a collection of those. You see a lot of people doing that with Coleman gasoline irons, for example. And for me, now that I have a greater awareness of variants, I'm really entranced by these little giants, and I suspect there's a whole lot of other subtle differences here, and I'm going to keep an eye out for those. And with that, thank you again. Please subscribe and do all the other stuff, and I look forward to seeing you at a later time.